The night Kito Rio was shot, he walked himself into the hospital. Nobody helped him through the doors. Not the two men who had ridden with him in the car, hands pressed to their own weapons out of instinct and uselessness. Not his head of security, Daisuke, who had served him for 12 years and had seen the man take a knife across the ribs without changing his expression. And not the woman who was still in his private kitchen 3 miles away, plating a dinner nobody had called to cancel, who would not find out what had happened until her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. and a voice she didn't recognize said, "Mr. Ria has been asking for you." She almost didn't go. Imani Brooks had worked in that house for 3 years. 3 years of 5-course dinners eaten alone, of standing orders and dietary restrictions delivered through assistants, of a man who moved through his own home like a guest who had never bothered to learn anyone's name. She was his chef. Not his confidant. Not his emergency contact. Not anyone he had ever looked at long enough to remember. She went anyway. She told herself it was professional obligation. She believed that, almost completely, right up until she walked into his hospital room and saw him, tattoos dark against the pale of a hospital gown, black hair still immaculate, for a line running into the one arm that wasn't already a map of dragons and koi and things she had never been close enough to read, and felt her chest do something she had been successfully ignoring for 3 years. He was holding a diamond ring. Not wearing it. Holding it. 2 fingers, easy, like a man who had already decided and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, calm, unreadable, as though she were a problem he had already solved. Then he said, "Sit down, Imani. I need to ask you something." And for the first time in 3 years, Kito Ryu used her name. If you felt something just now, that little pull in your chest, then you already know this story is for you. We tell the kind of love stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe, settle in, and let's see where this takes us. She had made sea-bass. It was a Tuesday, which meant the standing order was protein and vegetables, nothing heavy, plated simply. Imani had done it 100 times. She knew the portions, the temperature, the exact minute the fish would start to lose its texture if nobody came for it. She stood in the kitchen of Kaito Ryu's private residence and watched the clock and waited the way she always waited, quietly, without complaint, without questions. At 9:15, she covered the plate. At 9:40, she wrapped it. At 11:47, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. She almost let it go. The voice on the other end was male, flat, and careful in the way that people are careful when they are trying not to say the worst thing first. There had been an incident. Mr. Rio was at St. Luke's International. She should come. That was all. She drove the whole way without turning on the radio. She didn't know what she was driving toward. She only knew that her hands were steady on the wheel and her chest was not, and that somewhere between the kitchen and the car she had stopped pretending the two things were unrelated. The hospital was bright and cold. A man she had never seen before met her at the entrance. Tall, dark coat, the kind of stillness that comes from years of training yourself not to react. He walked her through 2 sets of double doors without explaining anything. She passed a waiting area where 3 of Kito's men sat in a row and none of them were speaking. One of them had blood on his sleeve. Nobody was looking at it. A doctor stopped her in the corridor. He was older, soft-voiced, and he spoke the way doctors speak when the news is serious but the patient is still alive. Carefully, like he was placing something fragile on a shelf. The bullet had been removed. That was the good news. The damage underneath it, however, the stress fractures in the heart muscle, the years of untreated strain that the trauma had now made impossible to ignore, that was something else entirely. He used words like irreversible and accelerated in weeks, realistically, and Imani stood very still and heard all of it. Then the man in the dark coat touched her arm lightly. "He's been asking for you," he said. "Specifically. By name." She looked at him. Why? He didn't answer. He just opened the door. She had cooked for this man for 3 years. She had learned his preferences and his patterns and every unspoken rule of his household. She had stayed invisible because that was the job, because that was safe, because wanting anything more than invisible in a house like his was the kind of foolishness she couldn't afford. She walked through the door anyway. He looked exactly the way she had left him in her mind on the drive over, controlled, composed, like a man sitting in a boardroom rather than a hospital bed. The gown was wrong on him. Everything about the room was wrong on him. But his face was the same face it always was, and his eyes found her the moment she stepped through the door, and he didn't look relieved or grateful or frightened. He looked like he had been waiting. The ring was already in his hand. She stopped walking. It was large, a single diamond, the kind that caught light even in a room this dim, held loosely between 2 fingers, the tattoos on his hand dark around it. He wasn't presenting it. He wasn't down on one knee. He was simply holding it the way you hold something you have already decided to use. "Sit down," he said. She didn't sit. "What is that?" "A ring." He said it plainly. "I need a legal spouse. For the empire to transfer cleanly when I die, there has to be a named partner. My attorneys have been clear." He paused. "I'm asking you." The room was very quiet. The monitors beeped their steady, indifferent rhythm. Imani stood at the foot of his bed and looked at this man she had cooked for and studied and carefully, deliberately never allowed herself to think about too directly, and felt something inside her go completely still. "No," she said. He blinked. Just once. It was the closest thing to surprise she had ever seen on his face. "It would be a legal arrangement," he said. "You would be taken care of. Financially, permanently. Everything would be drawn up properly." "I heard you," Imani said. No, the silence that followed was different from the first one. Heavier. He looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and she looked back and neither of them moved. Then he said her name. Not the chef. Not a nod in her direction. Her name, the way he had said it when she walked in, like it was something he had always known and simply chosen not to use. Imani. She had already turned toward the door. She stopped. She didn't turn around. Not fully. Just enough. "Why me?" she asked. "Out of everyone. Why me?" She heard him breathe. She heard him start to answer and then stop. She heard the silence where the clean, confident answer should have been, and wasn't. He had a reason. She could feel that. But he couldn't find the shape of it, and that speechlessness, from a man who always knew exactly what to say, told her more than any answer would have. She left without agreeing. She sat in her car for 40 minutes. In the morning, before the sun was fully up, she walked back through the hospital doors. He was awake when she got there. She had expected to have a moment, a breath, a second to stand in the doorway and decide exactly how she wanted to say this. He didn't give her one. He was sitting up, hands folded, watching the door like he had known what time she would arrive. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. She didn't take off her jacket. "I'll do it," she said. "But I have one condition." He waited. "You fight." She held his gaze and kept her voice even. "Not manage. Not arrange things from a hospital bed and call it living. You actually fight, the treatment, the doctors, all of it. You try." She paused. "If you're just looking for someone to sign papers while you quietly get everything in order, find someone else. I won't be part of that." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite discomfort. Not quite respect. Something in between. "Agreed," he said. She nodded once. Then yes. She had expected to feel something large when she said it. She didn't. It felt small and solid, like setting down something heavy she had been carrying without realizing it. His attorneys arrived within the hour. The paperwork took the rest of the day, documents spread across a portable table that someone wheeled in with the same efficiency as the four-stand. Imani signed where she was told to sign. Kaito signed without reading anything, which she suspected was habit rather than trust. By evening, it was done. Legal, binding, and completely without ceremony. Nobody said congratulations. She went home that night, packed a single kit bag. Clothes, her knives, a few things from her kitchen she couldn't work without, and came back the following morning. A cot had been arranged along the far wall of his private room. A small table had appeared near the window, just large enough for a portable cooktop and a cutting board. She didn't ask who had arranged it. She unpacked her knives and got to work. Kaito watched her from the bed without comment. She could feel his eyes on her back, steady, curious in a way he would never admit to. While she moved through the small space and made it functional. She had taken worse kitchens and made them work. This was no different. She told herself that firmly. By noon she had made him rice and a simple broth, nothing the doctor would object to. She set it on the tray beside him and stepped back. He looked at the bowl. Then at her. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I know," she said. "Eat." He ate. They didn't speak again for most of the afternoon. She cleaned her station. He slept, or pretended to. Outside the window the city moved through its ordinary day, completely unaware that somewhere in this building two people who barely knew each other were now, legally, everything. Neither of them knew what to do with that yet. The hospital had a kitchen. She never used it. What she had was a cooktop, a cutting board, 2 good pans, and the knives she had carried for 7 years. It was enough. It had always been enough. She worked in the space beside the window every morning while the city outside moved from dark to gray to light, and she cooked the way she always cooked, quietly, with full attention, like nothing else in the room existed. On the 4th day, a bag appeared outside the door. No knock. No note. Just a paper bag sitting on the floor of the corridor when she opened the door to check the time on the wall clock. Inside. 2 bundles of fresh scallions, a block of tofu, and a piece of ginger the size of her fist. She stood there for a moment looking at it. Then she brought it inside and used all of it. The next morning there were mushrooms. The morning after that, a specific brand of sesame oil she had mentioned once, briefly, to no one in particular. She didn't ask Kaito about it. He didn't bring it up. But she noticed, once, that when she turned from the cooktop, he was looking at the door rather than at her, in the particular way of someone pretending they hadn't just been watching. She started reading his chart when he slept. She wasn't a doctor. She understood maybe half of what was written there. But she read it carefully, the same way she read a recipe she hadn't tried before. Looking for the parts that mattered, the numbers that were moving in the wrong direction, the things nobody had explained to her directly because nobody had thought to. She would set the chart back exactly where she found it and return to her side of the room before he woke up. He started asking her things around the end of the first week. Small things at first. Whether she had always worked in private residences or if she had cooked in restaurants. Whether she preferred cooking for one person or many. She answered simply and asked nothing back, because that was habit. Then one evening, while she was cleaning up after dinner, he said, "Why cooking?" She thought about it honestly before she answered. "Because it's the one thing I could do completely on my own," she said. "Nobody could take credit for it. Nobody could say they taught me most of it. It was just mine." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you regret?" she asked. She hadn't planned to. It came out anyway. He didn't answer immediately. The monitor beside him beeped its slow, steady beat. Outside, a car passed on the street below. Not stopping sooner, he said finally. I built things because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I should have stopped and learned. She didn't ask what he meant by that. She thought she already knew. She came back from the pharmacy earlier than expected. The door to his room was not fully closed. She could hear voices, low, professional, the kind that belong to men who charge by the hour. She pushed the door open slowly and stopped. There were two attorneys she recognized from the day they signed the marriage papers. A third man she didn't know was standing near the window with a folder open in his hands. Hito was sitting up in the bed, listening, nodding at the right moments with the calm expression of a man reviewing something he had already decided on a long time ago. On the tray table in front of him were documents. Not medical records. Not treatment schedules. Transfer papers. Asset lists. A timeline laid out in clean columns with dates running from the current month forward, not far forward. 3 months at the outside. Nobody noticed her standing in the doorway. She set the pharmacy bag down on her table by the window. The sound made all four of them look up. The attorneys gathered their papers with the quiet efficiency of people trained not to react visibly. The third man closed his folder. Hito looked at her with that same composed, unreadable face, and something about the steadiness of it, the complete lack of surprise at being caught, made her chest go tight. The attorneys left without being asked. The door clicked shut. You were never going to fight, she said. He didn't answer. This whole time. Her voice was even, but only just. The condition I gave you. The thing you agreed to. You sat right there and said yes, and you had already planned all of this. The condition made the arrangement possible, he said. You wouldn't have agreed otherwise. She stared at him. So you lied to me. I told you what you needed to hear. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew he knew it was the wrong thing to say because something shifted in his expression the moment the words left his mouth, not regret exactly, but the recognition of a mistake, arriving just too late. I gave up my kitchen, she said. I gave up my schedule, my work, my life outside that door. I moved into this room because I believed you were going to try. Her voice stayed low. It was somehow worse that way. I'm not furniture, Hito. I'm not something you put in a room to make the arrangement look real. He said nothing. She crossed to the cot. She pulled her kit bag out from underneath it and set it on top. She folded the two things she had left on the chair and placed them inside. She picked up her knives last, wrapped them the way she always wrapped them, carefully, out of habit, because good knives deserved that much. Then she picked up the bag and walked to the door. He still said nothing. She reached for the handle. She had her hand on the door when he said her name. Not loudly. He didn't raise his voice, she wasn't sure she had ever heard him raise his voice. He said it the same way he had said it that first night in this room, when she had been walking away then too. Quiet and direct, like a hand placed gently on a shoulder. Imani. She stopped. She didn't turn around. The room was very still. The monitor kept its rhythm. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do in the late afternoon. Filling up with noise and movement and ordinary life that had nothing to do with any of this. Give me a reason, she said. One real one. She heard him breathe. She heard the small shift of movement as he straightened in the bed. She waited, the way she had always been good at waiting, except that this time the waiting felt like it was costing her something. I have watched you for 3 years, he said. She didn't move. Every dinner. Every morning when you came in early and thought no one was awake yet. The way you work, like nothing else exists while you're doing it. The way you never asked me for anything. He stopped. Started again. I told myself it didn't matter what I noticed. Men like me don't get to keep things they care about. Everything I have ever been close to has either left or been used against me. So I keep people at a distance and I call it protection, and eventually I believe it myself. The door handle was cool under her palm. You were never just an arrangement to me, he said. I just didn't know how to say that without it costing you something. So I said nothing. And then I ran out of time. She turned around. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him look. Not weak, Keto Rhea did not do weak, but stripped of something. The careful blankness was gone from his face, and what was underneath it was just a man, tired and honest and running out of days to hide behind. I knew, she said. I knew what you were doing. I knew why you kept the distance. She looked at him steadily. I stayed anyway. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a word for. 3 years, she said. I stayed 3 years in that house and I told myself it was just a job, and that was almost true. She paused. Almost. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she set her kit bag down on the floor. She didn't make a speech about it. She didn't explain. She simply set it down and walked back to her table by the window and began unpacking her knives the same careful way she had packed them, slowly, without rushing, because good things deserved that much. Behind her, she heard him exhale. It sounded like something releasing. Like a door, long stuck, finally coming open. He was not a good patient. He didn't complain, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that he treated the treatment the way he treated everything else. Like something to be managed and pushed through and gotten to the other side of as quickly as possible. The doctors would tell him to rest and he would rest exactly long enough for them to leave the room. The nurses would check his levels and he would ask sharp questions about timelines and percentages in the tone of a man reviewing quarterly numbers. Imani watched all of this and said nothing. On the bad days, she said nothing louder. The first bad day came 9 days into treatment. She heard him through the bathroom door, the particular silence of a person trying very hard not to make noise while their body does something humiliating and awful. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She went to her cooktop and made ginger broth from scratch and had it ready on the tray table when he came back to bed, pale and composed and pretending. He looked at the broth. He looked at her. She was already facing the window. He drank it without a word. The good days were quieter in a different way. On the good days he sat up straighter and his eyes were sharper, and sometimes, if the light through the window was right and he didn't know she was watching, he looked almost like himself. Those were the days she worked without the low background hum of worry that she had stopped pretending wasn't there. His men adjusted to her the way large, cautious animals adjust to something unfamiliar, slowly, with significant dignity. For the first 2 weeks they acknowledged her with nods that were more like careful non-movements. They held doors open with the energy of men performing a task they found slightly confusing. Then one morning she mentioned to no one in particular, while unpacking a delivery, that she couldn't find the right variety of mountain yam at the hospital supplier and that it was going to affect the texture of what she was planning for the week. She thought nothing more of it. The following morning she opened the corridor door and found 3 men standing in a row outside it. Daisuke, who had served Kaido for 12 years and had the presence of a very patient wall. A younger man she knew only as Run. And a third she had never seen before, who was built like a doorframe and was holding a paper bag in each hand with the careful expression of someone carrying something fragile. Between the 3 of them they had 7 bags of groceries. Daisuke held out a receipt without making eye contact. The third shop had it, he said simply. Imani took the bags one by one and thanked them. None of them responded. They turned and walked back down the corridor in single file. She went inside and got to work. It started because neither of them could sleep. The treatment had been particularly hard that day, one of the worst since they started. By 10 o'clock Kato had stopped pretending to rest and was sitting up against the headboard with his eyes open, staring at the middle distance with the focused expression of a man trying to will his own body into cooperation. Imani had been lying on the cot for an hour listening to him not sleep and feeling the particular tiredness that lives behind the eyes and has nothing to do with the body. She sat up. She didn't ask if he was all right. She already knew. She just moved her chair closer to the bed, not all the way, but closer than she normally put it, and sat down and pulled her knees up and looked at the same window he was looking at. For a while neither of them said anything. That was fine. They had gotten good at silence. Then he said, "I used to cook." She looked at him. "When I was young. My mother worked long hours, so I learned to make a few things. Nothing like what you do." The smallest pause. "Rice. Miso. Once a week I made tamago for my younger sister because it was the only thing she would eat without complaining." Imani was quiet for a moment. "How old were you?" 11. 12. He looked at his hands. It didn't last long. Things changed. She didn't push on the last part. She understood about things changing. "I had a sister too," she said. "She was the one who told me I should cook professionally. I thought she was just being kind." She paused. She wasn't just being kind. "Where is she now?" "Atlanta. 3 kids and a husband who can't boil water." She smiled without meaning to. "She calls me every Sunday." The room was dark except for the low light above his bed and the glow of the city coming through the window. It felt, for a moment, like a completely different room than the one they had been living in for weeks. "Tell me about the restaurant," he said. She looked at him. "What restaurant?" "The one you think about." He said it simply, like it was something he had known for a while. "You get a certain look sometimes when you're working. Like the space is too small for what you're imagining." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him. The size of it, the kind of food, the particular quality of light she wanted in the dining room in the early evening. The name she had been turning over in her mind for 2 years without saying out loud to anyone. He listened without interrupting. "You should do it," he said when she finished. "I will," she said. She meant it as she said it. That was new. It felt different from every other time she had thought it, firmer, like something had just been decided rather than dreamed. Neither of them said anything after that for a long time. But the silence had changed. The decision didn't come all at once. It came the way most honest things come. Slowly, over several days, in the space between what the doctors were saying and what Kaito's face looked like when they said it. The numbers were not moving the right way. The treatment was taking more than it was giving back. She could see him calculating it, the way he calculated everything, except that this time the math was about time and not money and there was no better offer coming. One evening she sat on the edge of his bed. Not the chair, the actual bed, which she had never done before, and she said, "What do you want?" He didn't answer right away. "Not what the doctors want," she said. "Not what your attorneys want. What do you want?" He looked at the window for a long moment. Then he said, "To go somewhere quiet. To eat your food. To not spend whatever time I have left feeling like this." She nodded. "Then that's what we do." He looked at her like he was waiting for the condition. There wasn't one this time. The house was 2 hours outside the city, close enough to water that you could hear it at night through the windows. Small by his standards, 4 rooms, a proper kitchen, a wide covered porch facing the water. Daisuke arranged everything in less than 48 hours with the efficiency of a man who had spent his career making difficult things look simple. They left the hospital on a Thursday morning without ceremony. She cooked every day. Not elaborate things, simple food, careful food, the kind that takes its time and shows it. He ate everything she put in front of him, which he had not always done in the hospital. Something about being out of that room had returned his appetite, or maybe it was just the food tasting different when it wasn't made on a portable cooktop beside a medical monitor. In the evenings they sat on the porch. The water was dark and quiet and the city felt very far away, which was exactly the point. He talked more here than he ever had. She did too. She told him things she had carried for years, about her family, about the choices that had led her to his kitchen, about the version of herself she had set aside somewhere along the way and kept meaning to go back for. One evening, while the light was going orange over the water, he said, "I'm not afraid of dying." She looked at him. "I'm afraid of dying and you not knowing." He kept his eyes on the water. "What you were to me. What you are. I'm afraid of leaving that unsaid because I spent too long pretending it wasn't true." "I know," she said quietly. "I know you know." He turned to look at her then, fully, the way he had learned to look at her, without the distance, without the careful blankness. "I'm saying it anyway." The water moved below them. She took his hand. Neither of them looked away. He died on a Tuesday. The light was coming through the window the way it did in the early morning at that house, low and soft and without any of the hardness it would pick up later in the day. She was beside him. She had been beside him all night, not because anything had told her to stay, but because she had learned, somewhere over the past weeks, to stop needing a reason to be close to him. He didn't struggle. That was the thing she would remember most clearly, later, when she tried to find the words for it. He had fought hard enough, in the ways that mattered, and when the fighting was done he let go the way he had learned, without pretending, without managing, without putting distance between himself and what was true. His hand was in hers when it happened. The light in the room didn't change. She sat with him for a long time after. Nobody rushed her. Daisuke was outside the door. She could feel it the way you feel the presence of someone standing very still. And he stayed there, quiet and steady, until she was ready. She was not ready for a long time. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in early spring, Imani Brooks stood on the pavement outside a restaurant with her name above the door and watched a line form. It wasn't a long line yet. But it was a real one, people who had heard something, who had come on purpose, who were standing in the cool morning air because they wanted to be there when the doors opened. She stood across the street and looked at her name in clean letters above the entrance and felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. Not happiness exactly. Larger than that. More complicated. She crossed the street and went inside. The kitchen was exactly what she had described to him that night, the size, the layout, the quality of light through the east-facing window in the early evening. She had built it the way she had always imagined it, without compromise, because he had told her she should and she had promised she would and she kept her promises. Above the pass, in a simple frame, was one photograph. Kito at the small table in his hospital room, turned slightly toward her cooktop, watching her work. He didn't know the photo had been taken. That was why it was the right one, because his face was completely unguarded, and what was on it was unmistakable. A man with nowhere else he wanted to be. She looked at it for a moment. Then she reached for her apron, the same one, black, executive chef across the front, the one she had been wearing the night a man in a hospital bed held up a diamond ring and changed the entire direction of her life, and she tied it on. Her team was ready. The doors were about to open. She went to work. If something in this story cracked you open, drop a comment and tell me what it was. That moment matters to me more than you know. And if you believe some stories deserve to be felt, not just read, subscribe and hit the bell. I drop new stories every other day, each one written from a place that's completely real. The next one is already waiting for you. Don't let it pass you by. Thank you for always supporting us.